The smell hit me first. Her perfume was the kind of expensive sweetness that didn't belong in our bedroom at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Thick, heavy, like it wanted to sit on the air and dare me to breathe around it. And I remember thinking, absurdly, that if my husband was trying to cover something up, he'd need a lot more than cologne and a confident smile. I'm Joanna Finch, and I fix computers for a living. Not glamorous, not the kind of job people brag about at dinner parties, but it pays the bills, and it trained my brain to notice what most people ignore. 20 years of troubleshooting teaches you one brutal rule. When something doesn't add up, it's usually because someone is lying. Like that night. Adrian, my husband of 12 years, came home claiming he'd been at the law firm until 11. "The Morrison case," he called down the stairs, voice draped in that practiced exhaustion he'd been wearing lately like a tailored suit. Funny thing is, the Morrison case had settled 2 weeks ago. I knew because I'd been the one who fixed the senior partner's computer the day they celebrated. I saw the champagne stains on the desk myself. I was in the basement, hands greasy from the carburetor I'd been rebuilding, using my old 1967 Mustang as therapy the way other people use yoga or wine. When Adrian's footsteps crossed the kitchen above me, I wiped my hands on an old rag and climbed the stairs, already feeling something cold and sharp sliding into place inside my chest. He startled when he saw me, actually startled, like he'd forgotten this house was also mine. His hair was perfect. His face looked freshly alive, not like a man who'd been grinding through documents for 14 hours straight. "Long night?" I asked softly. "Yeah," he said too quickly, eyes not meeting mine. "I ate at the office." Another lie, stacked on the others so neatly it almost looked like truth. I didn't fight him. I didn't raise my voice. I waited until the bathroom door clicked shut upstairs and the water started running. Then I reached for his laptop, because I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was about to become informed. Before everything cracked open, my life looked ordinary, solid, the kind of ordinary people assume is unbreakable simply because it's lasted a long time. I was 46, owned a small but steady computer repair business, and lived in a quiet neighborhood where people waved from their driveways and pretended not to notice each other's messes. I liked machines because they made sense. Problems had causes, fixes had logic. If something failed, you could trace it back to a missed connection or a corrupted line. People weren't like that, especially not the ones you loved. I met Adrian when I was 29, back when I still believed intelligence and ambition automatically meant integrity. He was a junior associate at a mid-sized law firm, sharp suits even when he couldn't afford them yet, words polished like weapons he didn't even realize he was carrying. I was fixing a server issue at his office, nothing dramatic, just another late afternoon call, when he hovered nearby, asking questions that had nothing to do with computers. "You're different," he told me that day, smiling like he'd discovered something rare. "Most people don't love what they do." I didn't love it, not exactly, but I respected it, and for some reason he respected me for that. We took things slowly. Dinner dates stretched into conversations that lasted past midnight. He liked that I listened. I liked that he made me feel chosen. When he proposed 2 years later, it felt earned. A simple ring, no spectacle. Just a quiet certainty that we were building something adult and real. The first 12 years were good. Not perfect, but honest, or so I thought. I supported his long hours when he was climbing the firm's ladder. He praised my independence, my business sense, told friends how lucky he was to have a wife who didn't need him. I took that as a compliment back then. I didn't see how easily admiration could curdle into resentment. We never had children, not because we couldn't, but because we kept waiting for the right time. His career needed focus. My business needed stability. We told ourselves there was no rush, that love wasn't measured in diapers and school schedules. Looking back, I see the small things now. The way he started guarding his phone, the way his laughter sounded a fraction too rehearsed. The nights he came home energized instead of exhausted, carrying stories that felt edited. I noticed. I just didn't connect the dots. His family adored him. His mother called him her brilliant boy, well into his 40s. His father bragged about his cases like they were trophies. I was welcomed, but never centered. I was useful, respectable. The wife who didn't cause trouble. And for a long time, I leaned into that role. I cooked when his parents visited, smiled through subtle jabs about my job, let comments slide when they praised his success without acknowledging the quiet stability I provided underneath it all. I told myself marriages were about compromise. What I didn't realize was that compromise, unbalanced long enough, becomes permission. By the time Adrian started acting strange, really strange, I had already trained myself to explain him away. Stress, pressure, midlife fatigue, anything but the truth. Because the truth would have meant admitting that the man I trusted, the man I built my adult life around, might be living a story I wasn't part of anymore. And that possibility? I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. The shift didn't happen all at once. That's the cruel part. If Adrian had come home one night and confessed, if there had been shouting or slammed doors or lipstick on a collar, I might have trusted my instincts sooner. But infidelity rarely announces itself like a thunderclap. It seeps in, quiet, persistent, like water finding the smallest cracks. It started with his schedule. Late nights became routine, not occasional. Conferences appeared out of nowhere, always vaguely described, always important. When I asked questions, he answered smoothly, but never twice the same way. Details shifted, timelines blurred. It was subtle enough that calling him out would have made me sound unreasonable, and I hated the idea of being that wife. Then there was his phone. He used to leave it anywhere, on the kitchen counter, by the couch, plugged in beside the bed. Now it never left his hand. Notifications were silenced. Screens angled away from me with casual precision. When I walked into a room, conversations ended mid-sentence. "You're imagining things," I told myself. But my body didn't believe me. I started noticing physical details the way I noticed faulty cables and corrupted files. His shirt smelled different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. His cologne was stronger, layered over something sweeter, something floral that didn't belong to me. When I mentioned it once, lightly, he laughed. "You're fixing too many machines, Joe. You're starting to debug people." I laughed too, because that was easier than admitting the comment stung. His friends changed as well. Dinners we used to attend together became work events. Invitations stopped coming. When I did see them, their smiles lingered a beat too long, like they were waiting for me to say something they already knew. His family noticed, I think, or maybe they chose not to. His mother once pulled me aside at a holiday gathering, voice low and careful. "Adrian's under a lot of pressure," she said. "Men at his level, they need space, understanding." Understanding. The word landed like a warning wrapped in concern. I nodded, swallowed my questions, and did what I'd always done. Made myself smaller so his world could stay intact. But the air between us thickened. Conversations turned functional. Who was picking up groceries? Which bill was due? When the car needed servicing? He stopped asking about my day. Stopped noticing when I stayed up late working. Stopped touching me unless it was expected. And yet, on some nights, he came home too alive, too awake, like someone who just stepped out of another life and hadn't quite shaken it off yet. Those nights scared me the most, because they felt rehearsed, like he was still playing a role even when it was just the two of us. I started keeping mental notes, dates, phrases, small inconsistencies, not because I wanted proof, but because something inside me was quietly preparing for impact. I didn't know when the truth would surface, only that it was coming, and that when it did, it wouldn't be gentle. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close upstairs. The water started running, steady, deliberate, like he wanted distance between himself and whatever was happening below. That sound used to mean comfort, routine. Now it felt like permission. His briefcase sat on the kitchen counter, leather polished, perfectly placed. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. My hands were steady in that eerie way they get when your mind has already accepted something your heart hasn't caught up to yet. Inside were the expected things: wallet, keys, breath mints, and then the receipt. Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in the city. Timestamp 8:11 p.m. Table for two. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Long enough for my pulse to start thudding in my ears. Long enough for my brain to run calculations it never wanted to run. It had been pouring rain since 9. His laptop bag? Bone dry. I powered on his laptop while the shower continued upstairs, the hum of it almost mocking me. Adrian had always been careless with passwords. He used the same one for everything. Our wedding date, reversed, romantic, predictable. The screen unlocked. And just like that, the ground gave way. His browser history was a catalog of deception. Hotel websites, private dining reservations, corporate housing listings downtown. Searches spaced out carefully enough to look professional until you line them up side by side. Then there were the emails. A thread labeled GM. The messages weren't explicit. They didn't need to be. They were written by people who assumed privacy was permanent. Can't wait for our conference next weekend. Same place as last time? I'll book it. You were incredible. I scrolled. My throat tightened. 3 months of coordination. 3 months of lies disguised as ambition. Business trips that weren't business trips. Late nights that never happened at the office. Conferences that didn't exist. Every line felt like a small, precise cut. I closed the laptop just as I heard the water shut off upstairs. I went back to the basement, sat on the cold stool beside my Mustang, and stared at the engine block without seeing it. 12 years. Not all of them were lies. That was the part that hurt most. Some of it had been real. Some of it had been love, which meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Wednesday morning arrived gray and wet, matching the way my chest felt, heavy, compressed, like something vital had collapsed inward. Adrian moved through the kitchen in his power suit, all efficiency and confidence, pouring coffee like the world hadn't shifted overnight. "I'll be late tonight," he said casually. "Client dinner." "Which client?" I asked, spreading butter on my toast with deliberate slowness. "The Patterson Group." I looked up. "You wouldn't know them." I did know them. A small accounting firm that barely generated enough billable hours to justify catered lunches, let alone luxury dinners. But I nodded anyway. I watched him leave, watched the extra cologne cloud trail behind him like a signature. 20 minutes later, I was at Murphy's Tavern. It wasn't really a bar. Not at that hour. It was where information went to have coffee, where people talked because they trusted the walls more than their phones. Big Mike Kowalski sat at the far end, his massive frame anchored to a stool that had survived decades of bad decisions. "Joanna Finch," he boomed. "Little early to be drinking, isn't it?" "Information gathering," I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "I need a favor." His expression shifted immediately. I slid a piece of paper across the bar. "Grace Martin, real estate developer." Mike studied it, then looked at me with the tired understanding of a man who'd seen this story play out too many times. "This about your husband?" "Maybe." He folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. "Give me 24 hours. By 6 that evening, I was parked across from Adrian's law firm, binoculars resting heavy in my hands. At 6:47 p.m., he exited the garage. He didn't drive home. He drove uptown. I followed. When he pulled into the valet at Chez Laurent, my stomach went hollow. 10 minutes later, a silver BMW arrived. A woman stepped out, tall, confident, perfectly put together. "Grace Martin." I watched through glass as my husband leaned in to kiss her hello. And in that moment, the last piece of denial finally died. I didn't cry. I documented. Because heartbreak was no longer my only emotion. Something colder had taken its place. I drove home on autopilot. The streets blurred past my windshield, familiar turns taken without conscious thought, like muscle memory guiding a body whose mind had fractured into sharp, disconnected pieces. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt hollow, as if something essential had been removed and my body hadn't caught up yet. Shock doesn't look like screaming. Shock looks like silence. I walked into the house, locked the door behind me, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a long moment. The familiar smell of our home, clean laundry, motor oil from the basement, the faint citrus cleaner I used on Sundays, felt suddenly foreign, like I was trespassing in a life that no longer belonged to me. I sat on the couch and stared at the dark television screen, my reflection staring back. I looked normal. No visible cracks. No outward sign that my marriage had just been reduced to evidence files on my phone. Anger came next, not hot, not explosive, controlled. The kind that makes your thoughts line up neatly instead of spiraling. I replayed everything. Every late night. Every vague answer. Every time I'd told myself not to be suspicious because trust was what grown, secure women did. Had I been naive, or had I simply loved someone who no longer deserved it? When Adrian came home later that night, close to 11, I was still sitting there, lights off, quiet. "Hey," he said, pausing when he saw me. "You're up late." "Couldn't sleep," I replied. He kissed my forehead, quick and distracted, and I felt nothing. No warmth, no comfort, just the faint trace of another woman's perfume clinging stubbornly to his jacket. We went to bed without another word. I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing slow, his body relax in the safety of a lie he thought I still believed. My mind kept circling one question, over and over, like a diagnostic loop that refused to resolve. How long was I supposed to pretend? Thursday morning, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed clarity before chaos. At 8 sharp, my phone buzzed. Big Mike, your girl's a real piece of work, he said without greeting. Grace Martin, 44, married, 2 kids in private school, owns Martin Development Group. And no, this isn't her first affair. I closed my eyes as he continued. She's got a pattern. Targets married professionals, likes the secrecy, likes the risk. Penthouse downtown, listed as corporate housing. That's where she takes them. Them. Plural. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm. Anything else? City's been watching her projects, cutting corners. Nothing nailed down yet, but her name's not clean. I thanked Mike and hung up, the pieces clicking together with horrifying precision. That evening, I watched Adrian closely. The way he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he avoided my eyes during dinner. The way he said my name less, like it had become something dangerous to touch. You seem distant, he said finally, studying me from across the table. Do I? I asked. Yes, is everything okay? I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I had defended. The man I had built my routines around. The man who had shared my bed while living a second life downtown. Everything's fine, I said. He nodded, unconvinced. Good. Let him feel it. Saturday came with the Riverside Fall Festival, a citywide event that drew crowds, cameras, and gossip like magnets. I knew, thanks to another quiet message, that Adrian and Grace would be there together. I dressed carefully, nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just myself, grounded, present. When I spotted them near the wine booth, hand in hand, something inside me settled. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about truth. I stepped forward. Adrian, I said clearly. The color drained from his face. What are you doing here? He stammered. Enjoying the festival, I replied. You remember mentioning it, right? Or was today supposed to be Boston? A small crowd began to form. Phones lifted. Whispers started. I turned to Grace, offering a polite smile. You must be the client dinner, or the conference. Hard to keep track. Adrian reached for my arm. I stepped back. No, I said softly. Public is perfect. I raised my phone and showed them the photo from Wednesday night. The kiss. The lie. The truth. This, I said, voice steady, is what 12 years of marriage apparently looks like now. Silence crashed down around us. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to control. Because I wasn't begging. I wasn't pleading. I was done pretending. The fallout didn't wait for privacy. It never does. By the time I walked away from the wine booth, the damage was already spreading, rippling outward through the crowd, through phones and text messages and whispered retellings that would grow sharper with every repetition. I could feel it behind me, the low hum of scandal activating in real time. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I went home alone. That night, Adrian didn't come back. I knew he wouldn't. Men like him didn't know how to sit with consequences. They fled to comfort, to validation, to the person who told them they were still desirable, still justified. Somewhere downtown, in a penthouse not meant for sleeping hearts, but for borrowed fantasies, he was being reassured that I was the problem, that I'd overreacted, that I'd embarrassed him. By Sunday morning, my phone started ringing. I let it. First, his mother. Joanna, she said carefully, the way people speak when they've already chosen a side but don't want to sound cruel. What happened yesterday was unnecessary. Unnecessary. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood like nothing had changed. What was unnecessary, I said evenly, was my husband lying to me for 3 months. There was a pause. You didn't have to humiliate him. I didn't humiliate him, I replied. I told the truth in public. He's the one who chose to live a lie in public spaces. Her sigh was heavy, disappointed. Adrian is under a lot of pressure. His career doesn't entitle him to cheat, I cut in, and it doesn't entitle you to excuse it. She hung up shortly after. Then came friends, mutual ones, the careful messages. We don't want to take sides. The not-so-careful ones. You should have handled it privately. Handled it privately, like the dinners, like the hotels, like the lies. By Sunday afternoon, I got a text from Adrian. We need to talk. You went too far. I stared at the screen, a slow, incredulous laugh leaving my mouth. Too far. He came home late that night, moving quietly like a guest in his own house. His eyes were red, his suit wrinkled, his confidence frayed at the edges. You embarrass me, he said as soon as the door closed. You embarrassed yourself, I replied. You didn't have to do that in front of everyone. And you didn't have to sleep with another woman, I said calmly. Yet here we are. He paced, hands through his hair, defensive energy bouncing off the walls. Grace and I were going to tell you. When? I asked. After the next conference? The next lie? It's complicated. No, I said softly. It's simple. You wanted both lives. He stopped pacing, frustration boiling over. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible. I looked at him then, really looked. I spent 12 years making space for you, I said. If you felt invisible, it's because you stopped looking at me. Monday morning, he didn't go to work. Instead, he showed up at my repair shop with Grace. They stood there together, my husband and his lover, like they'd rehearsed this moment. Like if they presented a united front, I might fold. We need to resolve this, Grace said, voice tight with restrained anger. What you did damaged reputations. I didn't look at her. I looked at Adrian. You brought her here, I said quietly. He swallowed. Yes, that hurt more than the affair. You humiliated us, Grace continued, in front of half the city. I corrected a misconception, I replied, finally meeting her eyes. People thought you were respectable. Adrian stepped in. Joe, please, let's not do this. This, I gestured around us. You mean consequences? I stood up from behind the counter. You lied to me, I said to Adrian. You used firm resources to carry out your affair. Company car, company credit card, company time. His face tightened. What are you talking about? I'm talking about a paper trail, I said calmly, one your partners won't ignore. Grace's posture changed. Alert. Calculating. You don't have proof. I don't need much, I said, just enough to raise questions. The air thickened. Joanna, Adrian whispered, you're taking this too far. No, I replied. I'm finally taking it seriously. Grace scoffed. This is revenge. This is accountability, I corrected. She stepped closer, too close. Careful, I said quietly. Something in my tone made her stop. Leave, I told them both, before this gets uglier. Grace turned to Adrian. We'll handle this. Handle it. Like everything else. They left. By Wednesday, the escalation was undeniable. Adrian's firm called him in for a review. Grace's company lost 2 contracts. Whispers became headlines. Concern became distance. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I felt myself changing. Not hardening. Clarifying. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Stopped hoping for remorse that didn't exist. Stopped imagining a version of him that had already died. By the time Adrian packed a bag and moved out, I didn't cry. I just watched. Because deep down I knew the worst moment wasn't behind me yet. It was still coming. The house was too quiet once Adrian left. Not peaceful, hollow. Every sound echoed longer than it should have. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, the faint creak of the stairs at night, as if the house itself hadn't yet accepted that one of us was gone. He moved out on Monday. No fight, no dramatic goodbye. Just a suitcase, his work clothes, and a tight expression that suggested he still believed this was temporary, that I'd cool down, that I'd miss him enough to compromise. I watched from the doorway as he loaded the car. He didn't ask for the house. He knew better. I'd bought it years before we married, with money I'd earned and saved on my own. The Mustang in the garage was mine. The business was mine. Even the furniture, most of it, had come with me into the marriage. That knowledge didn't feel like victory. It felt like proof of how alone I'd always been. That night, I slept on my side of the bed, staring at the empty space where his body used to be. Muscle memory betrayed me more than my heart did. I reached out once in the dark before catching myself, fingers curling around nothing. That was when it hit. Not anger. Grief. 12 years don't disappear just because you expose the truth. They linger. They argue back. They remind you of the woman you were when you believed in forever. I cried then, quietly, the kind of crying that hurts your throat and leaves you exhausted rather than relieved. No audience, no witnesses, just me, mourning something that had already died long before I knew it was sick. By Tuesday, the city's sympathy had turned sharp. People were kind but curious, too curious. How are you holding up? You must be devastated. I always thought something was off with him. Every comment felt like salt, well-meaning but invasive, like my pain had become public property, another story for people to process over coffee. At the shop, I worked mechanically, fixed machines, replaced parts, solved problems with clear causes and clean solutions. It helped, but only barely. At night, the doubts crept in. Had I gone too far? Had I destroyed him just to protect myself? Was I really stronger or just angrier? I replayed the festival in my head, the crowd, the phones, his face when he realized he'd lost control of the narrative. A part of me flinched at the memory. Another part whispered, he earned that. Still, the silence was brutal. Adrian didn't call, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to argue. And that hurt more than I expected. By Thursday, the loneliness pressed down hard enough that I considered reaching out just once to ask why. Not for reconciliation, just for closure. I even picked up my phone. Then I remembered the emails, the hotels, the way he'd stood beside Grace in my shop like I was the problem to be managed. I set the phone down. Friday night was the worst. I sat on the basement steps beside my Mustang, staring at the engine I'd spent 3 years restoring, hands idle for the first time in weeks. The smell of oil and metal usually calmed me. That night, it didn't. For the first time since this began, I wondered if I'd miscalculated. What if he really didn't care anymore? What if exposing everything had only freed him? What if I was the only one still bleeding? The thought lodged deep, heavy, and cruel. I felt small then, smaller than I had at any point during the lies or the confrontation. Small because the fight was over, and I was left alone with the aftermath. No adrenaline, no strategy, just the quiet realization that righteousness doesn't always come with comfort. That was my lowest point. Not the betrayal, not the public exposure, but the moment I understood that even when you do the right thing, it can still cost you everything you thought you were. I didn't know it yet, but that emptiness, that hollow, aching pause, was the space where something new was about to grow. The shift didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, the way clarity often does, slipping in when exhaustion finally forces honesty. Saturday morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was still, washed in that pale gray light that makes everything look unfinished. I made coffee out of habit, stood at the kitchen window, and watched steam rise from the mug in my hands. For the first time in days, my chest didn't feel tight. It felt resolved. My phone buzzed on the counter. Big Mike. "You sitting down?" he asked. "I am." "Good, because things just moved." He didn't sound gleeful this time. He sounded precise. Grace Martin's husband filed for divorce late last night, took the kids and left town. His lawyer's already requesting financial disclosures. And the city? They announced a full compliance review on her projects, Monday morning. I closed my eyes, not in relief, in recognition. This wasn't my doing, not directly. I hadn't forced anyone's hand. I hadn't lied. I hadn't manipulated. I had simply removed the cover she was hiding behind. Truth had done the rest. "There's more," Mike continued. "Adrian's firm suspended him pending investigation, misuse of company resources, reputation risk. They're not happy." I let out a slow breath. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me." After I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant, powerful. Instead, I felt lighter, because something fundamental had clicked into place. I had been asking the wrong question all along. It was never, why did he betray me? It was, why did I keep carrying his choices like they were my responsibility? Later that afternoon, I went to the shop, not to work, but to clean. I sorted old invoices, wiped down counters, reorganized shelves that hadn't needed organizing. Not because they were messy, but because the act itself grounded me. In the middle of it, Red stopped by. He stood in the doorway, eyes sharp, posture careful, like he was gauging my emotional weather. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said, and realized it was true. He nodded once. "Good, because I didn't dig all that up so you could doubt yourself." I smiled faintly. "I know." Before he left, he paused. "You didn't break anything, Joe. You exposed it. Big difference." That sentence stayed with me. Sunday evening, Adrian called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "What do you want?" I asked. His voice was hoarse, smaller than I remembered. "I didn't think it would end like this." I leaned against the counter, eyes closing. "It ended the moment you stopped telling me the truth. I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it worse." Silence stretched between us. "They're pushing me out at the firm," he said finally. "Everything's collapsing." I felt no urge to comfort him. No urge to punish him either. "That's not my responsibility," I said calmly. "I don't know who I am without this life," he admitted. I opened my eyes. "That," I said, "is something you should have thought about before you gambled it." He swallowed. "Is there any chance we can talk about fixing this?" I pictured the emails, the lies, the way he'd stood beside Grace like a united front against me. "No," I said, not angrily, not bitterly, just clearly. "There isn't." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt steady. That was the turning point. Not his downfall, not Grace's exposure, not the investigations or the gossip. It was the moment I understood that my power had never come from control or revenge. It came from refusal. Refusing to beg. refusing to absorb blame that wasn't mine, refusing to rebuild something rotten just because it was familiar. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And that choice, quiet, firm, irreversible, changed everything. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. By Monday morning, the city knew. Not because I told anyone, I didn't have to. When reputations crack, people rush to look inside. Whispers turned into confirmations. Confirmations turned into distance. Grace Martin's name stopped carrying weight. Contracts were paused. Meetings were rescheduled. Calls went unanswered. Martin Development Group issued a carefully worded statement about strategic restructuring, but no one believed it. The city's compliance review moved faster than anyone expected, fueled by documents that had apparently been waiting for the right moment to surface. The penthouse went dark. Lights off, blinds drawn. Her silver BMW stopped appearing downtown. 3 days later, the rumor became fact. Grace had left town, quietly. No farewell, no announcement, just absence. Her husband finalized temporary custody and froze several joint accounts. Her business partners began distancing themselves, issuing statements that used words like unaware and deeply concerned. The woman who'd once moved through this city like she owned it vanished as if she'd never belonged to it at all. Adrian fared no better. His firm didn't fire him immediately. They didn't need to. They suspended him, reassigned his cases, and stopped including him in meetings. In the legal world, that kind of silence is a verdict. He came by the house once to pick up the rest of his things. I wasn't home. I didn't plan it that way, but I was glad for it. When I returned later that evening, his side of the closet was empty. The bathroom drawer he used was bare. The guest room, where he'd been sleeping during those final weeks, looked untouched, like a space that had never really held him. On the kitchen counter, he'd left his key. No note this time. I picked it up, felt its familiar weight in my palm, and set it in the junk drawer without ceremony. It was just metal now, no meaning attached. People asked how I felt about it all. Satisfied, vindicated, relieved? None of those words fit. What I felt was distance. Not the cold kind, the kind that lets you see things clearly. I watched the consequences land where they belonged without reaching out to guide them. I didn't celebrate Grace's disappearance or Adrian's professional collapse. I didn't gloat. I didn't warn anyone either. I simply stepped aside and let gravity do what gravity always does. At the shop, business picked up. People lingered longer than necessary, offering sympathy disguised as small talk. Some brought coffee. Others just nodded with a respect that hadn't been there before. Not pity, recognition. They weren't looking at me like the woman who'd been cheated on. They were looking at me like someone who didn't fold. One afternoon, Mike stopped by. City's already moved on, he said, leaning against the counter. New scandal, new mess. I smiled faintly. That's how it works. But they remember, he added. Not the details, just the lesson. I knew what he meant. In a place this size, stories don't vanish. They settle. They become cautionary outlines instead of gossip. Adrian called once more. It went to voicemail. I didn't listen to it. Because closure doesn't always come from hearing the last excuse. Sometimes it comes from realizing you no longer need one. The house felt different as weeks passed. Not empty. Mine. I rearranged furniture, painted one wall in the living room a deeper shade of gray. Took my time rebuilding the Mustang's engine without the weight of someone else's deception humming in the background. I slept better, not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer ruled me. I didn't win anything. I didn't gain a new life overnight. What I gained was quieter, sturdier, harder to take away. I gained peace that wasn't negotiated. And somewhere downtown, in a city that had already replaced their names with newer scandals, a man and a woman learned the same lesson from opposite sides of the fallout. You don't lose everything because someone exposes you. You lose everything because of what you chose to hide. I walked forward without looking back. Not because I was healed, but because I was finally facing the right direction. Healing didn't arrive like forgiveness. It arrived like ownership. Weeks passed, then months. The sharp edges softened, not because I excused what happened, but because I stopped reopening the wound to check if it still hurt. Pain doesn't need supervision. It fades when it's no longer fed. I learned new rhythms. Mornings became quieter, unshared, but honest. I worked when I wanted, ate when I was hungry, slept diagonally across the bed without apologizing for the space I took up. I stopped bracing myself for lies that never came. The Mustang ran again by late spring. The engine turned over cleanly, steady and true. I remember standing in the garage with the door open, sunlight cutting across the hood, thinking how strange it was that something broken could be rebuilt piece by piece if you were willing to strip it down to what actually worked. That thought stayed with me. I didn't rush into anything new. No declarations, no rebound stories. I let myself exist without performance, without explanation. And slowly, something returned. Not trust in others. Trust in myself. I trusted that the woman who noticed the inconsistencies, who waited for proof instead of pleading for honesty, who refused to rebuild a marriage that required her silence, that woman would be enough to carry me forward. I never spoke to Adrian again. I heard things. Of course I did. A move out of state, a career restart that never quite took, a life reshaped by choices he once thought would stay hidden. As for Grace, her name stopped coming up, which is how it ends for people like that. Not with punishment, but with irrelevance. People ask if I regret making things public. I don't, because silence is not dignity, endurance is not strength, and love that requires self-erasure isn't love at all. If there's a lesson in my story, one worth carrying beyond this screen, it's this. Pay attention when something stops adding up. Respect the voice that whispers before it has to scream, and never confuse keeping the peace with keeping yourself whole. I didn't set out to destroy anyone. I set out to stop destroying myself. And that made all the difference.